It all began in Pennsylvania in the late 1800s when Charles Taze Russell came under the influence of a Second Adventist preacher. Borrowing directly from the prophetic speculations of Nelson Barber, a New York Second Adventist, Russell claimed that in 1799 the world had entered the time of the end. That in 1874 Jesus Christ had returned invisibly, and that the world would come to an end in the year 1914. One of Russell's teachings was that Egypt's Great Pyramid was designed and placed there by God as his second witness next to the Bible. It would be an instrument to reveal his great plan of the ages for mankind.
This measurement indicates the length of the year, the weight of the earth, the distance to the sun, etc.
Russell believed his dates and chronology were confirmed by the measurements of the interior passageways of the Great Pyramid. According to Russell, the passageways verified 1914 as the year the world would end. Finally, 1914 came and went. Russell and his followers were not raptured from the earth, and the end had not come. But in 1916, Charles Taze Russell died, sick, weary, and disappointed. A massive stone pyramid stands today at his gravesite as an embarrassing reminder of his false prophecies. When early Watchtower teachings that the world entered the so-called time of the end in 1799, that Jesus returned invisibly in 1874, and that the world would end in 1914 were proven false, doctrine was conveniently readjusted. In the new version, 1914 became the date of both Christ's invisible return and the beginning of the time of the end. This date was put forth not as theory or interpretation, but as hard, indisputable fact. Watchtower Society official Eugene Mortensen.
Jehovah's Witnesses, from their study of the Bible, have firm belief in the fact that since the fall of 1914, Jesus has come into kingdom power. And as he prophesied in the 24th chapter of Matthew, the generation who saw the beginning of this time would not pass away until all things would be accomplished. That means also the end of this wicked system of things.
How did the Watchtower arrive at 1914 as an all-important date? Their chronology is based on the year 607 BC, which they claim is the year Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians. Carl Olof Johnson, Swedish author of the book The Gentile Times Reconsidered, is a former Jehovah's Witness elder and pioneer minister.
I didn't question this chronology in the beginning because I thought the Bible supported it. I knew, of course, that historians dated the desolation of Jerusalem not in 607 but in 587 or 586. But in 1968 I conducted a Bible study with a man who wanted to know why historians they prefer the date 20 years later. So I started to investigate the matter, and I soon discovered that historians had very strong evidence in their support.
Johnson compiled his research and sent it to Watchtower headquarters, but the Society's leaders were determined to keep their doctrinal system intact.
I got a letter with a warning. I was warned that I should not share my findings with other witnesses.
To conceal the facts and suppress his 7 years of research, the Watchtower Society excommunicated Carl Olof Johnson. While the organization may not always consult Scripture in determining policy, they never hesitate to cite Scripture as proof of their authority. The Watchtower Society claims that it is the faithful and wise servant, or as Jehovah's Witnesses have translated it, the faithful and discreet slave spoken of in Matthew 24. Leonard and Marjorie Chrétien are authors of the book Witnesses of Jehovah. For 22 years they were loyal Jehovah's Witnesses. Leonard had risen to the position of elder and presiding overseer.
The original belief was that Charles Taze Russell was the chosen slave. The Watchtower Society taught that the stewardship of the things of God had been taken away from the Christian churches and given to Russell.
When Russell died, they had to adjust their belief to fit a new set of facts.
Now they claim that in 1919, having invisibly come into power over the earth, Christ needed an organization to announce his kingdom and administer his affairs here. So the story goes, he carefully examined all the Christian religions and rejected them in favor of the Watchtower Society. Peter Gregerson was a member of the Watchtower Society for nearly 50 years. He was a highly respected elder and served in a number of responsible positions.
And as a result, I started to do some very serious thinking about things that were going on inside the organization. It seemed to me, though, that everything always came back to the question, is the Watchtower Society and its leadership, are they the faithful slave? I really wanted to prove to myself that the Watchtower Society was right.
Gregerson decided to examine the same teachings that Christ would have examined in 1919 when he was supposedly evaluating the world's religious organizations. The Watchtower's latest teachings at that time were published in a book called The Finished Mystery.
What I found absolutely destroyed my confidence in the Watchtower. They had said that the end of the world would come in 1914. And in this book, that was just hot off the presses for Christ to investigate, we're saying that by the spring of 1918, millions of people would be dying in the streets throughout the world. It wasn't happening in 1918. Christ was supposedly examining this written material to see whether the Watchtower Society should be put in charge of all of God's interests on the earth, and they were guilty of the worst kind of false prophet.
In 1918, Judge Rutherford's lecture, entitled "Millions Now Living Will Never Die," was the beginning of a worldwide recruiting effort called the Millions Campaign. Not too surprisingly, it proclaimed the coming destruction of the existing world. It would happen soon, in 1925.
Based upon the promises set forth in the divine word, we must reach the positive and indisputable conclusion that millions now living will never die.
In 1920, the Millions book was published. In it, Rutherford claimed the Bible proved that in 1925, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and other faithful men of old were to be resurrected, to rule henceforth as princes on the new paradise earth. Finally, 1925 came, and as in 1914, nothing happened. Once again, the Watchtower Society's prophecy had proven false. In 1929, the judge had this palatial mansion constructed. It was deeded to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so they and other ancient worthies would have a place to live when they were resurrected. Located in an exclusive district of San Diego, it was given the name Beth Sarim, Hebrew for House of the Princes. On the radio and in print, he continually stressed that the end of the world was just months away. The end finally came, but only for Rutherford. In 1942, he died at Beth Sarim, the house he had built as a luxurious testimony to God's name. In retrospect, perhaps the only testimony this lovely mansion ever gave was to the cash value of false prophecy. In 1948, the Society quietly sold the property, covering up an embarrassing chapter in its history.
By the mid-60s, the Watchtower Society had all but guaranteed that the world would come to an end in 1975. It was a prophecy that would bring in a flood of new members, and the organization prospered. But it would have other effects on the ordinary Jehovah's Witness.
We thought Armageddon was coming in 1975. So I did not have a career. I didn't go to college because the end was so close. There was no need. The new world would be here. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have children. But because the end was so close, when Fred and I got married, we decided that we would postpone having children. So I believe we sacrificed a lot within the organization. Well, when the end of the world didn't come in 1975, and that prophecy of the Watchtower failed, I began to wonder if they were wrong on this, how many others are they wrong on?
And once again, Watchtower fact was revealed as nothing more than contrived fantasy.